Hello, dear viewers. We will continue the theme of premenopause and menopause. I'm Dr. Olena Berezovska and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. So when we talk about the stages of aging, we all begin to age from the moment we are born. Just imagine a baby who has just been born. Then a year passes and that child looks back at their newborn self and he has grown. Babies have grown significantly. From, say, 3 kilos, 6 pounds, they now weigh 10 kilos, 20 pounds. In other words, they have gained weight, grown larger, developed differently, and are already beginning to repeat sounds or even words. And if those 1-year-old kids could look at their newborn selves, they might say, "My God, how much I've aged. There was such a tiny, beautiful baby, and now I'm already 1 year old." Now imagine a 5-year-old child looking at a newborn. Have you noticed how children instinctively start cooing and mimicking baby sounds when they see an infant, as if imitating a baby themselves? Now imagine yourself as a teenager. Do you remember the time? We already felt old, everything seemed bad, as if life were almost over. At 19, I personally went through such a stage of existential reflection. I did not get into medical school, and it seemed to me that everything was over, that this was the end of my life. Not that I was suicidal. I had no intention of ending my life, but in my mind everything was already finished. I thought by the time I finish studying, I'll be 24. If I get in and all, when will I get married? When will I have children? And what then? Today, young people do not even think that way. Now we say you need to live until 30, 35 first, and only then start planning a family. By the way, this is also a false perception of one's reproductive possibilities. But back then, at 19, oh my God, it seemed to me that half of my life was already behind me. And there is nothing surprising, because when you look at your parents who were already over 45, close to 50, or even older, they seemed like older adults to you, almost 1 foot into retirement. Today, at 50, people are quite active and successful. At 60, I also have no intention of withdrawing from life, doing nothing or sitting on a bench watching life pass by, as our grandmothers once did, sitting on benches, cracking sunflower seeds, discussing all the local gossip, wrapped in headscarves and worn-out robes. We have a very different concept of life now, and that is why we are more active. Naturally, women want to look good at 50, 60, 70, and even 80. That is why it's very important to understand that how you go through these periods depends on you. And the most important thing is not to turn even the transitional period of menopause into some torture, into a belief that everything will be terrible, that menopause itself is something dreadful. You must stop even thinking in those terms. Yes, some things need to be checked, and things that need to be done, we will talk about that as well. But the most important thing is not to become fixated on all of this. So in terms of stages of reproductive aging, the ovaries begin to age around 31, 32. This has been clinically proven. Why does it happen? By this time, the ovarian reserve has truly begun to decline, but this decline is not critical. It's not rapid. It's a very slight decrease in the number of eggs, and reproductive function begins to fade very gradually. We also know, and this is well established, that the best period for conceiving children with the lowest risk of complication, both for the baby and for pregnancy, is between the age 20 and 30. That is the decade from 20 to 30. Let people protest and say, "No, what are you talking about? We are studying for so long. We are just beginning to live." And to some extent I can agree, because humanity has created a trap for itself. We have expanded, prolonged, and often expensive education where people need a lot of money and many years to obtain training and secure a place in life. As a result, a truly large proportion of life is now spent on education and building a career. Society often presents itself in a certain way. For example, as shown in the TV series Friends, people already 40, yet still boys and girls, not really planning to get married or have children except for a few individual characters. Overall, they are portrayed as energetic, carefree, and useful. There are many such movies. In this way, society protects the ideas that you can live for a very long time, happily and joyfully, living mainly for yourself, focusing on work and career, and only late, as they say, dealing with everything else. And here there is an interesting point. We actually have clinical data showing that by age 40, wisdom begins to emerge, at least in most people. Why do thinking pattern change? Because more associations begin to form. Up to the age 40, the brain mainly accumulates knowledge and information, processes it, and, so to speak, stores it on its shelves. But later, connections between these informational centers begin to increase. As a result, the algorithm for using this information improve. It is similar to artificial intelligence. You have more processing algorithms, more tools for analyzing information. And because of this, we begin to use knowledge much more effectively in practice. That is the essence of change. We do change. This is why people say that around the age of 40, a certain period begins when we suddenly start thinking differently. Moreover, not only we do think differently, but both men and especially women often experience a psychological crisis during this period. And this stage, a person begins to reflect, what have I done with my life so far? What have I achieved? Am I happy? Is everything really as good as it seems? This too is a natural process that many people go through. For women, this period is particularly frightening because they begin to realize more clearly that they are aging. This awareness becomes stronger. Naturally, they hear about hormones everywhere and start thinking, save yourself because it's only going to get worse from here. This is an incorrect way of thinking. Therefore, a psychological crisis and perimenopause are two completely different concepts. I will talk about perimenopause in another lecture. Still, you need to understand that the late reproductive period begins around the age of 35, after which the ovaries slowly start to age. I used to say that the ovaries are the organ that age first. In fact, this is not true. Our self, our body, our tissues, we all begin to age slowly, practically after the age of 25. The ovaries do not age faster than other organs. This has also been verified. So it is not true that if the ovaries age, the entire body suddenly ages faster. Our health does not depend entirely on ovarian function. Even when we talk about women or men and, for example, the testes, many of these ideas also myths. The gonads primarily play a reproductive role and, of course, a hormonal role. But in terms of hormonal function, the ovaries continue to work until death. Nothing dramatic happens to them. They will continue to produce hormones with additional support from the adrenal glands. What does end is reproduction. The only thing you will no longer be able to do once you enter menopause, with very rare exception, is have children. This means that the ovaries are not the most important organ in the female body. Even if a woman's ovaries are removed, her rate of aging does not differ from that of women who still have their ovaries. Therefore, it is also a myth that ovaries need to be renewed, improved, or stimulated to produce sufficient hormones. In fact, an increased level of hormones is actually worse because it can lead to the development of hormone-dependent cancers, especially those depend on estrogen and progesterone. We will also return to this topic in another lecture. Thus, closer to the age of 40, and for those of you who have followed my work before, read my books or watch my videos, you may remember that I talk about waves of accelerated egg loss. The last rapid wave, the fourth one, actually begins around the age of 38-39. During this period, we lose a significant portion of the remaining oocytes. However, they are not lost completely. When menopause occurs, every woman still has at least about 1,000 eggs in each ovary. It may even be more. This is simply the minimum we can identify with the technologies currently available to us. In reality, the number may be higher. What I want to emphasize is that it is normal to lose a large number of eggs during this period. Therefore, measuring AMH, anti-Muller hormones levels, or counting an antral follices to predict exactly when menopause will occur is not entirely accurate when done the way it is often done. I will discuss this in more details a little later. I will continue my lectures on premenopause and menopause, so if you don't want to miss these videos, please subscribe to my channel. See you soon.